Hi everybody, it's great to be back here again on Itamar. We are in my backyard and you can hear the wind howling and the birds chirping and you can enjoy the beautiful ambience of being outdoors here on Itamar. So I always enjoy giving a lesson out here. This week's portion is Korach. It's a very, always find it difficult to discuss because it's a portion, again, a very difficult chapter of history of the Jewish people. An argument, a group that came against Moshe Rabbeinu. But there's so much involved here and so much depth as usual in every portion. I don't even know where to begin, as usual, until we finally get rolling. But first of all, I want to show you that I'm wearing today a talit. A tzitziot, of course, but a beged elyon, an upper garment, my talit, which when you pray. And of course, then I'm going to be talking a little bit about this garment today, because part of the story of Korach and the rebellion against Moshe Rabbeinu has to do with understanding the deep meaning behind tzitzit. What are we always wearing? One of the 613 commandments, which reminds us of all the commandments, is the tzitzit itself, which is a very deep thing in itself, of course, like any mitzvah. But I want to we're going to get to that, God willing, and we'll see how, again, things take us. Number one, again, as usual, to get inspiration from my Torah lessons, there are a couple of rabbis that I love studying and listening to and trying to just get, just to connect to the mode, to get you in the portion of the week mode, which is so important. And I mentioned many people, the Chalban, who I love so much, reading his Torahs over the weekend, and a lot of the things I want to, based on certain concepts he brought down, and a great rabbi, again, which I enjoy so much, Rabbi Baruch, which I mentioned, Rosenblatt, another rabbi which I enjoy watching his Torahs, and together, with this inspiration, I'll try to put something together for our audience, and hopefully you will have some insight and some inspiration on this week's portion. So let's get down to business. Where do we start from? First of all, we have to try to understand this whole concept of Korach coming against Moshe Rabbeinu. And I want to begin by bringing down a Mishnah in Pirkei Avot. As we know, in the summertime is our custom to begin reading again from the holiday, from Pesach all the way to Shavuot, from receiving the holiday, receiving the Torah, we read Pirkei Avot, the ethics of our fathers, and we continue actually throughout the summer according to many, and that's our custom. And I even gave us a lesson, the group of lessons you can find on our website, touritamar.supportisrael.com, which you actually look for under video lessons, a group of lessons I gave a couple years ago on Pirkei Avot, which I only began. We have to continue that. I don't know how many, I think we covered, I don't even remember how many Mishnayot, but we have a lot more work to do in that area. But as a matter of fact, today we're going to bring down one little thing of the ethics of our fathers to understand that connects us to this week's portion. And I have it written down. I brought the Mishnah in front of us. I'm going to learn it with you. It says, Asara Dvarim. There are 10 things Nivru be'erev Shabbat that were created on Erev Shabbat, right before Shabbat. Be'bein hashmashot. What does bein hashmashot mean? So we know we have the day and we have the night. We have something called bein hashmashot. Bein hashmashot is the time where the sun sets until the stars come out, and it's around, let's say, 18 minutes, 20 minutes usually, depending. Other places of the world that it's longer. But of course, we're talking about the land of Israel, where time is very exact for all the laws and everything applies to the land. Those who are outside the land got to go according to the times that apply there, of course. But it's not prime time, I call it. But anyway, so it's a short period of time between, again, those 18, 20 minutes, whatever it is, between the sunset and the stars coming out, is called bein hashmashot. And the Mishnah teaches that there are 10 things that were created during this time, which means we're talking about on the 6th day of creation, right before the Sabbath came in. There are 10 things. And what are they? Well, the Mishnah begins by saying, Pi ha'aretz, u'pi ha'be'er, u'pi ha'ton, va'keshet, va'aman. It goes, again, talking about different things. And it talks about, the first one that we're going to really focus on today is Pi ha'aretz, the mouth, this mouth that swallowed up, we know Korach was swallowed up right in the ground when they went sinking down alive, but the actual hole in the ground that swallowed him up, that he went down in there, was created on bein hashmashot. Again, like the in-between stage between night and darkness. Now, what is this whole concept? First of all, this whole concept that 10 things were created at that time, and the question is why, and what does it all mean? The Maharal Prague, one of our great scholars in the 1500s, rabbis, philosophers, giants of Torah, he actually explains on this particular Mishnah that this time represents the day time. Let's start with the day. The day represents the creation of the physical, of course, as we know. Shabbat is the spiritual time. The time between the actual twilight, you want to call it, between daylight and night, that in-between stage, is really like a combination between spiritual and physical. That's what the Maharal says, to try to understand what he's saying. And on a deep understanding, he's trying to say that within each of these items he mentioned, there is some kind of mixture between the spiritual and the physical. For example, one of the things that were created, we're going to talk about as we get to it, is the story of the donkey of Bilam, right? As we all know, he had a donkey, which is in Parashat Bilam and Balak. And this donkey, the mouth that says piaton, the donkey that spoke, this actual concept was created then at that time between twilight. And why? Because as we know, speech is something so spiritual. It represents our mind, our deepest insight we have at speech. On the other hand, of course, a donkey is the most physical thing you can get. And the two combinations, that's why it's interesting that it was created on, the Maharal talks about, at this twilight period of time. Again, that's not the focus of this week's portion. We want to focus again on Korach, and on this week's portion where the mouth that swallowed them up on the ground was created. So again, we have to understand what is this combination of, on one hand, the physical that meets the spiritual. It's a very important concept to try to understand, and I hope at the end of this lesson we can make some kind of head or tails regarding the fact that this was created in twilight time. In order to go on further, we want to try to understand a little bit insight into what really was the problem with Korach. And if we read right away in the beginning of this week's portion, we see what seemingly motivated Korach. He came along with a very, very powerful statement over here. And this statement, of course, has affected humanity until this very, very day. And I'm going to read it again. And it goes on like this, and we'll read it. I'll begin reading the first few verses. So it says again on chapter, in Numbers chapter 15, verse 1. Vayikach Korach. And Korach took Ben Yitzhar, Ben Kahat, Ben Levi. First of all, the Torah here describes gives the different names of Korach itself, which is also interesting. Ben Yitzhar, the son of Yitzhar, the son of Kahat, and the son of Levi. And first of all, looking at these three names itself, it's brought down in the Or Chaim HaKadosh that these names reflect his greatness. Korach was a great man. Until, of course, he fell and he sinned, he was a very, very great man. And it's reflected within his names. Yitzhar comes to the word in Hebrew meaning afternoon, Soharayim, when the day lights up. That's why it's called Sohar, is a window. During the day there's so much light. He was full of spiritual light. Ben Kahat was part of that same family, the Kahats, which they actually carried the vessels, carried the vessels of the tabernacle, the holy ark. Ben Levi, he was a son, a Levite. In all the ways, in every aspect, we see what kind of great man Korach was, where he came from. And the question is, how did he fall? How did he have such a great fall, which we're going to talk about? And then it goes on, V'datan v'aviram, these are the people that he got to his side. Bnei Eliav, the sons of Eliav, On ben Pelet, and On the son of Pelet, Bnei Ruvain, from the tribe of Ruvain. Vayakumu lifnei Moshe, and they stood before Moshe Rabbeinu. Vanashim bnei Yisrael, 50 there are 250 of those who stood against Moshe Rabbeinu. Nisiei Eidah, they were heads of tribes. Kirei Moed, Anshe Shem, people of renowned name. Heads of Sanhedrin. How could such a terrible thing happen? They all coming against Moshe Rabbeinu. And let's go on to see what happens. And what are they saying? Vayikalu al Moshe v'al Aaron, and they gathered before Moshe and Aaron HaKohen. Vayomru alehem rav lechem ki kol ha'eda kulam kedoshim. Enough. The entire congregation is holy. Ubetocham Hashem, and God is within every one of them. Umadua titnasiu al kahal Hashem. And why are you trying to, go over? Titnasiu al kahal Hashem. Why are you trying to be greater than thou? And this again was the complaint of Korach. So basically, he's trying to say that everyone in Israel is holy, and why do you think you're holier than thou? That was basically their attack on Moshe Rabbeinu and Aaron HaKohen. I want to again go a little bit deeper here. If we look into the Zohar Kadosh, the famous Kabbalist of all time, as we know, buried in Meron, in the mountain up north in Israel, Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, and he says that every lie, in order for it to really have an effect, has to be based on some kind of truth. And what is the truth that he's basing his lie on here? He's saying the entire nation is holy. The entire nation of Israel is holy, which is of course true, right? Everyone is holy, everyone, but he's even saying more so. Korach is saying everyone's on the same plane, which is true. Why is that true? This again, we're going to go into more detail now and try to explain this concept. I mentioned it many times that we know that there are 5 levels of a soul. The 5 spiritual levels that are brought down in our books it starts with nefesh, which is the most simplest, lowest level, which is ki hadam, the blood is the nefesh, which is the simple level of life. That's the first level. And as we go up, ruach, spirit, which is a higher level, right? The next level is neshama, is the soul level, which is even higher. And then beyond the soul level is something called chaya, which comes from the word meaning chiyud, vitality. And then finally, yichida, meaning individual, or something. It's the highest level is called the yichida. It comes from the word meaning a yachid is an individual, which means it's so high. It's like a complete unison with God. A person at this highest spiritual level is called the yichida. Now, in this world, obviously, we are slowly, but surely, as we're brought down to this world in creation, as we're born, we just, of course, recognize and understand the first spiritual level in our lives, which is nefesh. Nefesh is the basic necessity for a human being to survive, whether it's eating, drinking, basic human functions that he shares together with any kind of living being in the animal kingdom, plant, and of course, insect, or any kingdom that you find in the world of living, whether it's, even we spoke about before, inanimate objects need some kind of spiritual energy to keep them going. As we know today, when people study physics and learn about the atom, and of course it's much more advanced today, discovering that what's holding those atoms together is some force in there holding everything together within even an inanimate object, which of course we know what holds everything together is really a spiritual level. But as a person grows, he begins to reveal more and more spiritual levels that exist, until finally the job is to one day reach the highest spiritual level that we have. And this is brought down, of course, in all the great works of Torah, our esoteric works of Torah. But how does this connect with Korach and with this argument against Moshe Rabbeinu? The point is that everyone, if we look at everyone of Am Yisrael, was originally, our souls came all the way down from the highest, loftiest places of right. And what does that mean for us? It means that we are in our inner, deepest spiritual makeup are really all equal. And that was the point that Korach was trying to make. But what was the major problem? The major problem with his statement was he said, why are you trying to stand up and, holier than thou attitude? And in this way, it was a frontal attack of what our mission in this world is all about. And that is called Torah u'mitzvot. Acting and doing our commandments. Doing the 630 commandments in this world. And this concept that Korach brought down, of course, reminds us in history, we experienced this in Christianity with replacement theology. And when they're coming along and saying that the Jewish people have sinned to God, and therefore now they are no longer a chosen nation. This concept is exactly what this man, Korach, actually was saying now. He was saying we're all on the same level. And his war against the 613 commandments, we're going to see right now in a couple of midrashim, another few examples that I'm going to bring down. And number one is a midrash, and I think I have it here, I brought it down, which, how did Korach convince the people of Israel to stand with him? As we know, Moshe Rabbeinu worked very hard to get everyone out of the situation, and not only the 250 people that were killed, but others, as Rashi brings down, the whole house of Israel almost stood on Korach's side, and he almost managed to pull them all on his direction. And the question was why, and how did he do such a thing? So there's a midrash that talks a little bit about what Korach did. I'd like to bring this midrash down. And here is what the midrash says. Shaya mitlotzetz al Moshe Aaron. He was making fun, he was mocking Moshe Rabbeinu and Aaron. Kines aleim kol hakahal. He gathered the entire nation of Israel. Shenamar vayakel aleim Korach et kol ha'ida. Hitchil lomar lefnehem divrei leitzanut. He began to actually say, like leitzanut means like, joking and saying stupidity. V'amar almana achat yesh b'shchunati. He gave an example of a woman who was a widow in my neighborhood. V'ima shnei na'arot yitomot, and 2 orphans. V'yala sadeh achat bata lachrosh. Talk about again a story of a woman who was a widow, and she had two orphan girls, and they had one little field, and they wanted to plow the field. Amala Moshe lo tachosh b'shor v'chamor yachdav. Moshe Rabbeinu says, wait a second, ladies, you can't plow this field together with a cow and a donkey together. It's considered a mixture, a hybrid mixture. You have to separate the animals. Bat lezroa amala sadcha lo tizrak hilayim. She wanted to plant seeds, and Moshe Rabbeinu says, wait, you can't mix the seeds together. Bat liktzor velasot arima. She wanted to cut the wheat down and make, put her sheaves together. Amala leket shicha ufeya. Moshe Rabbeinu said, wait a second. You have to make sure you leave over leket shicha ufeya, which means the different parts of the field for the poor. Bat lasot goren amala tanili turma umaser rishon umaser sheni. She put everything together in the threshing floor, and then she had to separate out the tithes. Itzdika let adin v'nanalo. What could she do? She said, okay, I have no choice. And she went ahead and she gave to Moshe Rabbeinu what he asked for. And that's the first story that Korach is talking to the nation of Israel and trying to show how the Torah, these mitzvot, are worthless and they're just doing, unfortunately, bad things. Me'asta machrat hasadeh ve'kanta shtei kivsot. What did this woman do? She sold the field and she bought 2 kivsot, 2 sheep. Kedei lelavush migzotehen. She wanted to actually make garments from the wool that she can get from it. Lelavush migzotehen. Ule'enot meperotehem. She wanted to enjoy of the fruit. Kevan sheyaldu, when they gave birth, Ba'aharon, came Aharon. V'amar tenili et hasadeh. Aaron comes along and says to her, wait a second. Tenili et habechorot. Give me the firstborn of these animals. Shekach amar lo Kadosh Baruch Hu, this is what God says, Kol bechor asher yivaled bevkarcha ubetzoncha hazachar takdish laHashem Elokecha. Any firstborn animal that will be born in your field, from your flock, will be given to has to be given to Hashem, a firstborn animal. And the Midrash, I'm not going to go through all the details in the Midrash, but what do we see here? That Korach is trying to explain that here is giving an example of a poor, innocent woman with 2 children. They're trying to survive, and look how they have to abide by all these seemingly ridiculous laws, separating tithes, doing this. What's going on over here? This is what Korach was trying to do, to show that the laws, following the Torah and following the mitzvot, the commandments, are not important. It's the most important thing is our spiritual level. We're all on a deep essence, come from Hashem. We're all equal in God's eyes. The mitzvot don't seem to be important. And then, let's go a little step further now. We know that Korach's wife had a lot to do with this whole rebellion against God. And Korach's wife says to him, and they're all discussing again the laws of tzitzit, which I opened up with why I'm wearing my talit today. And they say, their question was, if you look very carefully at my tzitzit, you see I have a blue string over here, and this blue string is tchelet. You see it's a blue color, and the other ones are the white color. Because Torah says we have to put in tchelet, a string of tchelet, and the blue thread. And what they all did was they had these talitot, these garments that they made of a garment. Instead of like we have a white talit, they made everything the color blue. And they went to Moshe Rabbeinu and said, you know something? Is a garment that is completely blue, is it need to have tzitziot? You have to put in the strings again on the garment. So of course Moshe Rabbeinu said, yes, it doesn't exempt the garment from the mitzvah of tchelet. So again here they were mocking, how is it possible? The entire garment full of tchelet, and one string, and here one string is enough, and the whole garment can't exempt the garment from the mitzvah of tchelet. So again, these was the claims. As we see, it was a frontal attack against Moshe Rabbeinu on the commandments that Moshe Rabbeinu brought down through the Torah, saying that these commandments were not necessary. They weren't from heaven, and that's, we know, is a certain kind of kfirah. It's people that do not believe in the importance of the commandments. We know again there are religions that completely did away with all the commands of the Torah and said they're not important anymore. The Jews were replaced, and everyone doesn't have to do any more commandments anymore. And this is exactly what Korach was saying, as it brought down in the Midrash, it's showing the deepness of Korach. But his whole thing came from a deep concept. It comes from a very deep place, realizing that inside of us we are all equal. And that was the message that he tried to bring down on this world, and saying, listen, we're all equal, so why do we have to do all these commandments? What does it all mean for? And because when you have to do things and you have to work and prove your spiritual level, and obviously it all depends upon how much work you do and how much spiritual cleansing you do. And that's why mitzvot, when there's mitzvot in the world, it means it's a diverse world with different levels of spirituality, not just one people on the same plane. And that I want to explain in much more detail. The famous Ramchal, the Mesilat Yesharim, Ramchal is a Moshe Chaim Netzato, as we know, a great Torah scholar, Kabbalist, who lived, as we know, originally. He comes from Italy. He made his way to Akko in Israel. He wrote tremendous works in Torah. And his most famous is called Mesilat Yesharim, the Path of the Just, which I recommend for everyone to read, but not just to read it, you have to live it, a life of that book. And he talks about how, of course, our spiritual level grows one level after the next. How are we supposed to spiritually improve ourselves one step after the next? Just keep going up like a ladder. And that's what this world is all about. Moving slowly and doing one spiritual rectification after the next spiritual rectification until we finally reach a high spiritual plane. In this world, we cannot skip over spiritual levels. The different levels of our soul, we have to grow until we just climb this ladder. At the end of days, we will eventually reveal that highest spiritual level come to be revealed at the end of days. But we're not there, we're not in that plane yet. And of course, this is what Korach was trying to, the message he's trying to bring across, in that he was looking at the end of days. He was looking at, out of his lineage, eventually came Samuel, Shmuel HaNavi, who anointed King David. He saw some kind of, end of days there, from the house of David, to the house eventually when the Messiah will come, the end of days. And he was thinking that we were on that, he was trying to say we're already on that plane, but of course he was so dangerous in his behavior, trying to nullify this whole entire world, the job that we have to do in this world, of doing the Torah and doing all the commandments in this world. And I want to expand even more on this topic. Again, if we look at the tzitzit itself, how deep this is, which this was his major thing, his attack against Moshe Rabbeinu, right, the tzitzit. As we know, we pray, we try to put the tzitzit over our heads. And what does the tzitzit actually look like? The tzitzit is a garment which you cover your head with, right? Your whole body is covered with it. And then it has these strings which come all the way down, and the different knots on the strings. But we all know that we have to teach. What does it represent in our deep spiritual understanding in our Torah? If we read about what is it, the meaning of behind tzitzit. Why is it important to understand that a garment in one way completely surrounds us? What does it represent? This represents the fact that the highest spiritual worlds, which is I mentioned before, The highest spiritual level, Yechidah, is represented, right, within the garment of the garment of the tzitzit. I mean, it's like a light, it's like a sun which is coming down. And this is what all the source of all the energy, the spiritual energy, coming from. The spiritual garment of God's energy, God's light, which is surrounding us completely. But from that spiritual light, we have to tap into it and bring down the influence of that spiritual light through the tzitzit, which are these strings. And each of these strings are like pathways of the spiritual energy coming down through the strings all the way down to us in this world. Which means we have to work so hard to bring down, to cause the spiritual energy to shine, to be revealed in this world. And that is by doing these commandments, by doing the tzitzit, which represents every one of the 613 commandments. By doing every commandment, we are more and more revealing the presence of God in this world. And that's the important, the deep concept of tzitzit, where Korach, basically he wanted to cut off the tzitzit. He said, what do you need it, right? What do you need it for? Just wear a garment of tchelet. Just wear a garment, completely blue garment. You don't need it. So he was trying to say there's no reason for the mitzvot in this world, right? We are all connected to, and on the highest level, we're all come from the same place. There's no reason for the world of this work of doing all the commandments. It's very, very deep in the fact that Korach in Hebrew comes from the Hebrew word meaning kerech, meaning bald. As we know in the Kabbalistic teachings, we know that here, in a beard, here in our head, it represents channels of spiritual energy. And the brain itself, right, which is surrounded by bone, right, the brain is, inside the brain, as we know, our spiritual soul, which hovers over our intellect. But coming out of that intellect, coming out of our thoughts, is the influence, the spiritual, like tzitziot, just like the strings of tzitziot coming out and making its influence, which means it shouldn't remain locked up inside a kind of vessel that can't come out, but it has to come down. And Korach, again, who was trying to show there's no need for this spiritual energy, the levels, that's why he was bald, that's why he didn't have hair. It's very, very interesting in the fact that the punishment, this is what the Chalban brings down at the end of a beautiful essay I've read of the Chalban. He brings down something very interesting. Korach, as we know, was swallowed up alive right down into She'olah, right down under the ground. And if we look at when a human being standing on the ground of earth, he looks like a hair, little hair particles coming out of the ground. The whole idea, of course, of human being is to be that channel of spiritual influence. And Korach, who did not, he went against that and challenged that whole concept. He was swallowed up, like not having it all a name for himself, completely swallowed up, completely went back into like a hair going back into the follicle itself. Explains an amazing deep insight into what Korach was and why was he punished in that direction. There's a story brought down in our Midrash about one of the Amoraim that was walking with someone who wasn't Jewish, and he wanted to show him where Korach was. To find Korach, and they found like these two holes in the ground, and smoke was coming out, whatever it was, and they said, listen in, whatever, he puts a sponge in there with water, and I'm not going to go into the details, there's a lot of, obviously, depth behind us explaining the story itself, but then he goes, listen, what is he saying? And he said something, Moshe emet v'Torato emet. Moshe is emet. Right? Moshe Rabbeinu is truth, and his Torah is truth. Which means this is what Korach, for so many thousands of years, until he met that point, so many years since the Amorites in the 400s, in the 500s, and it finally happened, this story. Think about the story of Korach, how much time elapsed since then. And this is what Korach was constantly saying, Moshe emet, v'Torato emet, and his Torah is emet. The whole point is the rectification of Korach, and this kind of concept, how to rectify it, is to understand that the Torah and all the ordinances, all the commandments, the oral law, which explains all the written law, is 100% truth, and this will bring us to the final stage of redemption, to the final stage. We will reveal our level, how we all come from the same exact source. But in this world, it's a world of so much action. We have to work so hard to reach spiritual levels. You see it in this world happening all the time. A lot of people claiming, that they're all of a sudden calling themselves rabbi, and and bringing themselves all kinds of titles, and different people, coming up all over the place and claiming fame and claiming greatness, and trying to, everyone has their own little following over here. This comes from, again, the fact that people are, on one way, obviously, searching for truth, but unfortunately, people do not understand the importance of how it is to connect to true teachers, to the true source of truth in this world, in order to find the proper way of behaving. And that's exactly what Korach did. Korach wanted it. What am I different than any of you all, right? I'm just as good as you all are. We are all the same level, right?